Morning, everyone. I really appreciate you joining us this morning, especially as we begin the second week of our work in this conference. I wish to sort of have just a recap of what's gone on and what's going forward and how that relates to my lecture today. I'm going to share my screen right now with everyone. So you can see, as my name is Craig Rote. I am a IHF Handball at School working group member, which I will explain in greater detail. I'm also an IHF CCM lecturer. A major part of what I've done has also been a national team coach for USA Team Handball since 2014. I saw and brought up a group of cadets through youth and then supported Julio in the juniors at the World Championships. And after the World Championships last summer in Spain, I moved over to the women's side and for a new project and brought a group of 14-year-olds to the IHF trophy in Montreal. We ended up 3-2. We did quite well. We were a very young group. But it was good for me to have a new start within handball, and it was a good developmental opportunity for me to leave the coaching and development of boys for the coaching and development of girls, something I'll touch back on at the end of our lecture today. I very much appreciate everyone coming together in this fashion. I know my colleagues the last week, this isn't an ideal, I'll admit it, this isn't an ideal situation. I think we are testing new boundaries on the ability to deliver coaching curriculum and possibly certification. And I look forward to this brave new world that we are forging together in a platform with so many talented coaches and people involved in the sport of handball. So I just want to say thank you for letting me work with you today to discuss how we build a better high performance foundation. And I think we start to discuss this in contrast to the lectures you've already received. I'm just going to go over a short list of my esteemed colleagues' work. We had Julio with physical conditioning and video analysis. We've had defense tactics by Jorge. We've had retreat by Diego Soto. We've had development of individual techniques by Rafael, and then goalkeeper training by Mats Olsen. In many ways, the wonder of the developing world is how do we do these things with players and staff that don't have the experience that the established handball nations have. And as we go into next week with counterattack tomorrow with Jorge, offensive tactics again with Rafael, talking about group tactics, I think it's really important for us to discuss how we go about building that foundation for high performance and how handball at school as a program, a complete developmental model, can support both the growth in your country and the development of your particular players and teams. Today's lecture will be broken into two sections on this building a better foundation. The first will be an overview of the handball at school developmental model. I will talk a lot about the program, it's a renewed program and how we are working right now to create a very efficient and system of delivery for teacher and coaching curriculum. We'll pause in the middle. I'll pose some questions to consider, and then we'll discuss how applying the tenets of our program can directly relate to you for high performance success. And then we'll have some question and answers. And so first I'm going to talk about a little story from 2017 at the World Championships. I think this is a key thing for us to understand. I sat on the panel at the Global Coaches Symposium with the top French coaches discussing the French system. And the panel began, this roundtable discussion began with a video. And then, mind you, this is in front of 200 coaches that attended, many of whom are in the French system. developmental system, and it showed videos of Daniel Narcisse and Karabatic and Abelo not complaining, but saying they were different than everyone else and that they lacked the technical and tactical skills and understandings of their opponents. At this time, the French system was starting to really take command in both women's and men's categories at all age divisions, youth, junior, and senior. They were beginning to really explode on the scene as the dominant force. And interesting was listening to these players talk about the small group collaborations, the creativity, the individuality that they were allowed to play with, and how it was having success still made them feel insecure. It was interesting. Insecure was a word they used several times in comparison with their German counterparts or their Spanish counterparts. And I found this to be a very interesting discussion that opened up, because in the middle of this symposium, coaches began to stand up from the developing group in France, upset that all the work they had done to have the players say that about them. And it really had me thinking, how do we end up here where we have a really, at the time, a superior gameplay being displayed at all levels for both genders, and winning in the end, which is our goal in high performance, at all Olympics, World Championships, and Continental Championships. And I found myself really fixated on this question. You know, this was our first week together as a working group for handball at school, and I feel this panel shaped a lot of what I felt about handball and how to develop handball. And it really asked the question, what is high performance play? And so from my standpoint, this paradox of we think we have to have all these structures in place and give the players all the answers. And the French were showing us that collaboration, creativity, ingenuity, innovation, all of these were skills you could develop and train and allow to compete at a very high level. And so this paradox really, you know, here's the picture of them winning the championships, the global symposiums in the first week of the championships. And they're complaining that they don't have the same tools as their counterparts, but yet here they are holding the trophy. And it really made me examine, and my colleagues on the working group examine, how do we build players in this fashion? It doesn't mean we have to follow the French system. It just means, how do we incorporate these aspects of problem solving, of small group collaboration into a way to make everyone's high performance better. And so that's where I really want to start with this idea of, here we have the best players in the world complaining they're inadequate compared to their counterparts. We have their coaches who develop them saying, I'm ashamed that they're saying this, especially the ones that are in the high school system, the trainers and developers. They were very upset about this, and yet here you have success. And so we began from that aspect and really looked at what is a complete handball player, and began building on that sentiment. So at for us, the last 2 years were spent after the 2017 writing our first volume of our book, Teaching Handball Teachers Guidelines. Here, I think we should say the word teaching and teacher are easily exchangeable for the words coaching and coach. It simply means the act of building and developing handball. Teaching has a component that I will leave from this, which is what teachers are responsible to do. But coaches should follow the same processes as the teachers to develop complete handball players. A little bit of a review or an overview of our work was, we were tasked that over the next decade, we would build a program that could reach 5 million kids, which is quite a big task, especially considering the setbacks we're now facing with the coronavirus and the ability to place lecturers within developing countries. But more importantly was to create a complete teaching handball series of booklets that would be a complete developmental guidebook for the sport. Spent 2 years on the most important, which is teachers' guidelines. which really breaks down the sport. Well, I don't need to go into that today, which will talk about basics of, you know, position play or basics of techniques, basics of tactics. I'm not going to go into that today. I'm only going to talk about how they relate to the developmental process. The second book, which we've just begun when we had our first meetings in Hungary, was a book of games. And we'll talk about this in relation to when I discuss game problems. But the key here is to remember that the game-based approach is a very successful way to develop athletes, and we're going to go over that. And we're going to have an entire book on simply games, answering the most important pressing game problem questions in our sport across the whole developmental span. Our book after that will be attack. Our book after that will be defense. We'll finish with goalkeeping and conditioning. Presently, we are translating this first book and all of our materials from English into Spanish, French, German, Arabic, and Russian. We are expecting the Spanish version of the book to be available. We were hoping by the end of this month, but it'll likely be sometime middle of May. I spoke with Cecilia today, and we will bring the link to you when it's available. It'll be on the IHF website, and it will also be on the IHF Education Center website. So that's a little bit of an overview of what the work we are doing. There's 3 members on the group. My colleagues are Alana Hapkova from the Czech Republic, and who's our working group chairperson, and Luisa Striga, who is, many may know because she helps support in South America, especially in Brazil and Chile and other countries. We're also part of the working group. Secondary to this core work that we are doing is the development of posters, trifolds, booklets, articles, online seminars, and coaching certifications. One of the redesigns of the coaching curriculum within the IHF is that now handball at school is no longer a participation certificate, but a coaching license, equivalent D license, intro to handball. Our multipliers do a modified course for a level C that we are working on, which is our most important people within developing countries will then be able to get the basic handball level C license and then move from there to B into A. But by bringing together everything under one pyramid, it should greatly streamline coaching education throughout the world, and also allow my colleagues and I to really focus on developing the sport together instead of independently, which is a big deal. One of the links I have here is for the IHF Education Center. All of the games, all of the drills that we have worked into our program for handball at school. We spent several weeks in France at Montpellier and in the Czech Republic, shooting children playing these videos and adolescents playing these games and drills. And it's a very important aspect, the integration of our program with the IHF Education Center. So we will have everything at your fingertips available to you to be able to develop your own players, no matter their levels. The CCM also is coordinating with this and working with us on this. And so when this aspect of our new coaching curriculum is finished, it will all be integrated into one streamlined function. Okay, so now I want to switch from this overview of what is handball at school to why it matters to you. The first step is understanding what is the developmental program that we created with handball at school. We distinguish between 5 main levels at handball at school. Please follow the color codes. They are directly related to all graphics within the within our book and our programming, and we want to recognize that it's a developmental stepping process. Begins with novice. You can do this ways because the important factor right now is that the primary factor is the level of the players and the secondary factor is the age of the players. So even if you're 19 years old and you're new to the sport, you still need to begin with novice programming. It doesn't mean you have to play mini handball the way a 7-year-old would play it, but it still means what we teach in mini handball matters to the developing player. And so we work through handball at school. The domain of handball at school is all novice, beginner, and intermediate. And we go into the advanced level. Something that's important to recognize here is that the advanced level, while in our book, underserved, because that's our level C and the next thing we're working on. Within the curriculum aspect, we have the full advanced program in the book of every skill that's needed and how to develop it. And then at the expert level is where the CCM steps in. So the color codes matter as we go forward and as I break down these programs. But I want you to remember at this point, the primary factor is the level of your players. And you cannot develop players, you can't have them step into advanced programming unknown to the sport and play at a level capable of high performance. And so I'm going to move to the next frame, which is a little bit of a background of what we do. This will be less important for a high performance coach of adults, but it's very important for understanding at the foundation of our program, which is handball at school, how learning by doing greatly changes the game for developing the sport around the world. In many instances, we bring handball at school to 200 teachers in a city. We spend 3 days with them. We move on to the next city. We might have 70 teachers, and then we move on to the next city and we might have 200 again. The basis for teachers and in classes, because it's engaging, is the same for coaching. Learning by doing, if you're coaching young children, it's the most important thing you can do. And it relies on certain characteristics of children and to keep them active and to keep them involved in the coaching that you're doing. This first step is always natural curiosity and fearlessness. We never want, the goal of this program is to keep that aspect alive throughout the developmental process, teaching them to then explore through play, to remember by fun. Now that's a key step. Having fun is important, especially if you're dealing with 14 years of age and under. If we want kids to play handball, we have to make programming that's both developmentally appropriate and fun. A diversity of activities is hugely important. We can't keep running the same drills and games at them. We need to test them and provoke them in different ways. Mastery comes after that, and then new challenges. And this rotational system works. And now we have a natural curiosity and fearlessness towards the new challenges. You explore through play again. And this is learning by doing is really important because we understand that ideal learning occurs through experiences. Active participation of players is demanded of development. And then we have to attract all learning styles, especially kinesthetics. An involvement of children, creating a relationship with physical activity. This is the basis of handball at school. This is not as important for a coach of 18-year-old the junior national team, but it's the basis if you're working with coaches that are supplying you with players. And you should remember these bases, okay? And so the basis of our program is a game-based approach. This is the big switch for ourselves and the program that we're creating. We understand effective handball coaching is about combining the teaching of tactical understanding with skill development. It's like two pieces of a puzzle, and they go together. To separate them is to not see the picture, the fuller picture. And so the cycle that we have here, which I'm going to break down, is based for teachers on the teaching games for understanding model. But you could easily translate that to coaching games for understanding model because it's important, and it begins with a basic game form. If I have 10 kids come to me and they're 8 years old, the last thing I need to do is have 4 plus a goalkeeper versus 4 plus a goalkeeper and just play. That's not going to teach them what they need. I need to begin with a basic game form. When my players walk in that are 18, players that played for Julio and I in the national championships played a version of mini handball with contact and a regulation ball in the months leading up to it to go back to develop proper developmental stages. So we begin with the game form. The second stage is going to game appreciation. And this is where it's important. You need to let them fail, let them explore, let them, whatever the basic game form is. The first in handball is 3v 2 plus goalkeeper, or 4v 3 plus goalkeeper, which means the offense always has the advantage situation. You begin with that initial game form and you go through game appreciation, which is an emerging understanding, which just means the kids test it in their own heads and fail and try new ways to deal with it. But that begins the first of the main processes, which is tactical awareness. They quickly begin, players will quickly begin to understand how to think tactically. They know they can anticipate what the other team will do. They can change their behaviors. And that's called cue perception. Starting to recognize is it an active defense we're playing against? Is it a passive defense we're playing against? What should I do? How to do it? And this goes to skills. Skills need to be taught in this way. Skills are always need to be taught in the context of conflict and resolution. Here's the conflict. Here's how you resolve them. You introduce technical skills as tools for fixing a problem, which always remains with your players. And then it becomes situated performance. This is where you step in, the learning task, the stage between 5 and 6. And if you go through our book, we really explain to you why this matters, this idea. And we're going to come back to this in the second half, learning tasks and the questions you need to ask. Because in the end, you're trying to have situated performance. Because once you have situated performance, which means they're doing what they need to be doing in the phases that basic game form allows. You know, let's use the context, 3v2 plus a goalkeeper, which means you have 3 offensive against 2 defense against a goalkeeper. And always the players are trying to identify who is the open player. And once that's resolved and the players now can do it and master it, is when you move to the next game form. And so I'm going to go break down the developmental stages in using this concept here. But what's important to understand is the players will dictate when the development happens. Their inability or ability to solve the game problems will dictate when you advance to the next game form. We have loose guidelines for the age groups, but once a developmental milestone is reached, you must provoke new problems until you build in such a way that a complete handball player understands all the game problems. And so they begin broad and they become more specific as you develop players. It's from, we're going to go over it in a minute, but it begins broad and goes specific. So what are the 4 major game problems in handball? The questions you see show kids thinking, playing, developing, awareness on the court. But what are the 4 major game problems? The first is maintaining ball possession. In handball, the second you retain it from the offense when you're on defense, maintaining ball possession is the priority. The second game problem is making forward progression. This is a big, important skill for technical, tactical skill for players to learn. How do I do this best? For me, with young children, I take dribbling away. The first two stages, I literally ban dribbling until you're in the effective zone, and the dribble draw is all you have left. I want them to learn small group collaboration, better recognition. Their eyes are up front. When you're dribbling, you're focused down. I take away the dribble. I even do that with new players who will come to me and are training with the youth national team and have never played the sport before. I restrict their dribbling. I do not want them to go into the habit of dribbling. And so understanding the game problems, dribbling inhibits forward progression, inhibits collaboration, inhibits goal for goal motions. So it's these questions are fundamental because these are how we develop players. The third major game problem is attacking the goal and shooting. This is important skill for kids to learn. In this 3v2 context, you can see that am I well positioned kid is the one that needs to get the ball. Yes, the girl with the ball might have the 1v1 skills to break it, but that's not what we want to teach them in the beginning. The first goal is to teach them space recognition, because 1v goalkeeper will always be a higher percentage shotter at this level, but in most instances, the 1v goalkeeper is the optimal solution. And so here you have kids that are playing, and these kids are not understanding at first, are they too close together? But attacking the goal and shooting is an essential key. And then the fourth main game problem is regaining the ball and protecting the goal. And you can see that in the questions that the kids are asking themselves. I'll give the translator a moment to kind of discuss that and kind of read them to you, but so you can understand what is important here for the developing handball player, especially at the basic level. Okay, so as we move forward with an understanding of the four game problems, we must develop players along the scope of the game problems. That's the key fundamental aspect. There's skills that are involved. So as the game problems progress, so do the skills. And you can see here, if you remember the color coded, novice. A novice, the developmental fundamental handball skills, and the novice level is the introduction and initiation of basic skills. This is passing and catching, throwing, shooting, basic footwork, defensive positioning. It's just to give them a few tools and suggestions to be able to solve the game problems they are facing. Novice, it's very important, even with no matter your age, appreciation of the game. Kids need to be taught in such a way, and young players and new players need to be taught in such a way that the game is fun, dynamic, and engaging. When those three things are in place, kids will want to come to practice, kids will want to learn, kids will want to defeat their friends, and this is where the first success happens. The game is set up that in the novice level, no matter the age, that the 3v2 plus goalkeeper is you're one pass away from recognizing the open person and then teaching that person to do a breakthrough on goal and to have the 1v goalkeeper. I don't worry about at the novice level. Continuity is important for them to have it. I don't need to stop them every time they make mistakes, no matter the age. I might talk over them in suggestions, but what's key and essential here is that they get an appreciation of the game. They get success. The more kids that touch the ball, the more players that touch the ball, the more shots that happen, greatly affect the development of the players. As we move to beginner, we begin with a lot of repetition. And these are repetition of basic movement skills. And these repetitions need to be done without repeating. And so in the beginner level, we start to then provoke the need to use these skills proficiently in many different ways. Different types of games, different types of drills, different types of basic game forms. And they don't realize it, but they're building contextually a fuller repertoire of tools for when they play the real game in the advanced level. Especially true in this beginner phase, in the development of fundamental skills, is creating a safe environment for taking risk and for failure. If we want what the French have, if we want creativity, intelligence, problem solving, and decision making, which means they're no longer robots controlled by the coach, but are developed by the coach to work independently, collaboratively in small groups, then a safe environment for taking risk and for failure are essential for the development of high performance. Because at the level we compete at, and I'll use a little aside in personal reflection, the speed of the game at the World Championships was awe-inspiring, but it made it really hard to coach the players in the moment because of the speed of the game. And it was amazing. And it was, and you had to really use exchanges to discuss with the players what you need from them, how you need them to do it. But you couldn't do it when they're on the court because the outcome had already happened. The second they turn their face towards you, if you're trying to tell them something in the middle of it. So we want to have a safe environment for taking risk and for failure, which will then translate later in the program, but also for immediate as the transition to intermediate. Now in intermediate, we learn a variability of skills and actions. And this is hugely important. And we're going to go over what basic game form then creates the circumstances to learn a whole new set of tools to use. But intermediate becomes an essential phase. My recommendation for most developing countries is to work through the novice and beginner phases, but the intermediate is the foundation you can't skip over. You can't skip it over. It's one of the most essential stages in the development of handball players, is this variability of skills and actions, and this exploring the new possibilities for failure and success, which means we go from, in the novice level, we're learning to find the space. In the beginner level, we're learning to create the space. In the intermediate, we're learning how to do it against zone defense and with the beginning concepts of positions. Intermediate might be 4v4, but the players are doing a self-rotation, which we'll get to, which means they're outside and inside, defense and offense, forward and backwards. You're starting to learn width and depth, which is the most important thing you can learn during the intermediate phase. And then we move to advanced, and advanced becomes the precision of details and skills and specific techniques by playing position. Now, this is one of the most interesting aspects of our program, but because our book doesn't only marginally touches advanced in the text, but delivers a full curriculum for advanced, just reading over the advanced curriculum is fascinating in how we build those precision of details and skills. And now we have a wider availability of practice tasks given to us. And this is really one of the keys, is this understanding of the fundamental skills. You can't just start out bringing a player in with a group of advanced players and expect them to catch up. He still needs to go back. She still needs to go back, learn how to recognize space, learn how to create space, learn how to win the 1v1 in order to have this. And so for my own academy, I created a lot of work on what I call modified developmental tracks, which means what happens when a kid who's a high aptitude athlete at 16 wants to join the youth national team and has zero experience. I know many of you experience the same thing. And a lot of times the lack of continuity, the lack of understanding impacts the quality of the gameplay of the whole team. And this is something we're going to come back to later. And as we progress forward, I want you to see how it works together. Now, I've just talked about this, so I'm going to really just go over it one more time. Begins with unstructured defense in mini handball. The second stage becomes individual defensive responsibility. You begin with a 1v1 or in the 1v1 against the full court, and then the half court press. And then you begin with the zone defense. You start to learn positions, and then you transition to full handball, which at first is 5 court players and then 6. But what I have to go back to again and confirm in all of you is the primary factor is the level, and the secondary factor is the age of the players, which means going forward, I'm taking the ages off the screen. I want you to start to think about developing high performance players, and that these are the necessary tools and skills they will need to be able to play at the level you want them to play. Okay, so as we go forward, this is what I want you to remember. So now we end up at the novice stage. Let's really look at the novice stage. novice stage. And then you can take out the word mini handball. You can create with older players, developing players, a situation that has the same game form. But this is the first basic game form. The first basic game form is gameplay with uneven numbers, 4v3 plus goalkeeper, 3v2 plus goalkeeper. On a small size court with a soft ball for kids, but you can play it on a half court, or you can play it on a large court if you want to develop with older players. But the key is the recognition of space and the advantage of that one player. And in this game form, the goalie comes forward in the offense. And it's a great way to train players to understand fast breaking style of play that is common. And so what did we learn here? We learned to solve numerical advantage in large and open space. Always large to always broad to specific, always large to small. Understanding of game principles, tactics, and techniques at this first level, throwing, passing, collaborating. Improve basic motor and playing skills. And that's one of the most important things, is that for handball players to be successful, they need a proper foundation. And the proper foundation are these basic skills and motor skills and an understanding of the basic game rules. If we bring players in, if I'm in the United States and I bring a new player in, one of the most difficult things I have is how to introduce that player to the sport without ruining the gameplay that the more developed players have. And it takes time and art to learn these things. I'm not Spain. I'm not Germany. I'm not France. I don't have 1,000 kids in each cohort. I don't have 20 people at each position competing in their clubs and then competing for the national team position at those positions. We don't have that luxury. And sometimes we have to bring in high aptitude athletes way later than you wish and start from scratch with them. And this is what's important to understand. They need to learn to find the available player, to find the space. The fixation and the fixation for space, the fixation for what I would call the most important space, which we all know is right in front of the goal at the 6-meter line. You know, the defense and attack of that space is key to learning in this, but learning to find the open player is just as important. You know, in the first stage game form of uneven, the unstructured defense, many players. So if I begin with a new group of kids or a new group of teenagers or a new group of young adults, the older I get, the less anarchic they play, but they tend to coalesce around the ball. And so the main focus is attacking play in that first stage. You want to get that forward progression. And so we want to encourage learners to adopt a spread out and spacing gameplay. Remember, width and depth creates passing lanes, which increases the possibility to retain possession and to make forward progression to attack the goal. This is essential. This is essential. The modern game is played in such a way that the skills learned in this sort of a construct directly translate to success at later levels in fast breaking play with the fast throw off. These are all key fundamental aspects of handball. And just because we have handball at school and we think of it for kids doesn't mean developing players don't use this or need this. And that's how we do it. And so here's a little focus and a little closer examination on the use of the gameplay with numerical advantage. You know, in this construct, we're focused on offense. As a coach, you work with positioning, you work with anticipation, interception with the defenders, but you're really focused on offensive. After the loss of the ball, any player can assume the goalkeeper position, or a coach can decide. This is a key part. This is also a part because you're developing the instinct for retreat. Because the goal is empty behind them, it provokes such an instinct in them to defend their goal that you're actually creating equally impressive developmental understanding of the term retreat. Because your goal is empty, someone's got to get back to defend it. You have to move. And then not strict with technical mistakes in the beginning. The last thing we want to do in this novice stage of development with all players of any age is to be overly burdensome in stopping the play with technical mistakes. I often will give a new player an extra step. I'll let him maybe double dribble once or twice and just suggest to him during it. But the key factor in this is allowing the gameplay, let them feel the speed of it, the complexity, more so than to do it correctly at first, and then tune them into correcting their mistakes. Hold them accountable in future steps, but in the present, always trying to maintain the quality and speed of the gameplay. And then this is a huge thing. There's unstructured defense. The defense is free to move. There's avoid contact. As I develop players and add them in, I start to add active and passive, or passive and active defense within this context. This allows the players to then feel the pressure that comes with moving the ball up the court, making decisions, finding the passing lanes, looking for the open player. That's the key to the novice stage. And then we move to the beginner phase, which is really about individual defensive responsibility. Now we're starting to focus on defense. Now we can add, and you're teaching the offense to beat a full court pressure at first. And that's difficult. That's really difficult for players to understand how to beat the full court pressure. They're on you the second you get the ball in possession, someone's on you, which is an essential function of the first phase of retreat at the highest levels. So you're teaching them early on how to adapt, how to control when they're on defense, and the offense is learning how to make it work. And so this is one of the key aspects of the beginner stage, is this first test of pressure. Now we have to create the open space. Players cannot skip. Players of any age cannot skip this stage. They're learning 1v1 skills. They're learning to play under pressure. But the need to create space forces players to have small group collaborations. The game form, 3 and a goalkeeper versus 3 and a goalkeeper, 4 and a goalkeeper versus 4 and a goalkeeper. Here's where we introduce the idea of a medium-sized court and a tailored size ball. My kids are 18 years of age and they're guys, I'm using the size 3 men's ball. If my kids are 8 years old in the beginner phase, I'm using a soft skin ball. The key for all developmental stages is that the ball matches their ability to control it and manipulate it properly. And so it doesn't matter the age, just bring it together. And here's what we do. We're creating numerical advantage in large and open spaces, exploring and developing game principles, that we're going to discuss later, but we're improving the motor and basic playing skills that we introduced in the last level. We're understanding further the game rules and respecting fair play, and we're learning to play a variety of roles. And it's important at this stage that kids learn to be a helper as a referee, because it changes the context. And especially for new players, it forces them to learn about the game in a way that they haven't thought about it before. Second stage, mini handball, individual defensive responsibility. You can see here how the even-sided games work. You can see from the chart and the graphics that there is an important part of what we're doing in learning to control and manipulate space, trying to get to that center part, the space of greatest value. How do we, and as a defender, you're learning to, in this stage, you're learning to force them into the bad zones. They haven't learned position play yet, so you're learning to force them into the spaces of least value. And so this is a key idea. As you move to half court pressure, it then builds the retreat back into the game. This idea that I have to get back to defend. As we move to the intermediate stage, which is the third stage. Now this is my favorite spot. I love working with middle schoolers. This is one of my most passionate areas, and that's solving game problems brought on by zone pressure defense. It's a magical phase because they're first learning. This is their first basic form of team handball. And we can build into this competency at this third phase. But this retreating to a zone defense changes the game for the offense, because now you're learning to win 2 fights. You have to beat the first group to then compete against the second group. But you're learning to manipulate width and depth, working inward and working outward to solve the game problems. And so what you have here is 4v4 plus 4 and a goalkeeper, v4 and a goalkeeper. Still medium-sized court likely. Even if you have adults, it's important. Move it to the side, flip it on its end and play sideways and play in a smaller court with less people, but always with these same principles involved. Here, you're learning to create numerical advantage in a small space. So first, we work from large to small. And now because it's a two-line defense in the back, it's forcing us to make decisions, but there's still enough space to make the 1v1 move or to collaborate in such a way to create the 2v1 plus goalkeeper. We're developing gameplay competencies in fast transitions. This is another element of the intermediate game that I love. You're starting to build competency in fast forwarded play. No longer does the goalkeeper take the ball forward, like in novice and beginner, but it's restarted in the middle. We're starting to learn fast throw off. We're starting to learn transitions. We're building on what we do. And here we have improving motor and basic playing skills, extending game knowledge, principles, tactics, and technical skills, and learning a variety of roles. But you can't skip these steps. The game form 5v5 with a rudimentary form of zone defense. You can do it. You can have 3 line players and 2 forward players. Play 5v5, spread out offense, no pivot play. You're starting to develop the skills they need, and these skills are essential in learning from the basic game form. And here we have the introduction of the self-rotation rules. Here's a graphic that shows how that does that. I was the outside attacker, now I'm the inside defender, and vice versa, and they keep rotating, which starts to develop the understanding of roles for players. You can't just begin a player who walks in at 17 years old and say, you're the half-right defender. You've left out an entire developmental course that was 3 or 4 months long in as I discussed before. You've left out 3 or 4 months of modified development for a player to just step in and try to play. Doesn't even understand the game problems. Doesn't understand what he's trying to solve. He's mirroring other players. If you don't go back to the beginning, you can't make it to the end. And that's the truth of development. And so here we are at the intermediate stage, creating and exploiting numerical advantages against zone defense, breaking through defense, creating numerical advantage. Now we introduce in this phase a more complex practice model. Our tasks become more particular. And now we introduce partial game forms. So now as a coach, you're starting to develop and analyze, well, what do they do or don't do? How can I help them develop the skills they need to do it? And that's why partial game forms come into play. Gameplay, 2v2 with supporters in half or full-size court. The supporters are there to be an outlet for technical passing and skills, but not there to be tactically involved, because we're working on the core 2v2 in the middle. You can divide your court in half and have 3v3 on one side and 3v3 on the other. Now they're trying to highlight what they've learned, but do it in a tighter space. The development of handball is always performing on a larger space until you can begin to do breakthrough shots between 1 foot of space between a half and inside defender. That's the goal. The goal is always that. And then we come to the advanced phase, which is really important for most of us, because the advanced stage is the moment before high performance, before the expert phase. And if we don't have in place what's necessary in the advanced stage, we won't be able to perform at what we need to in expert at high performance. And this is where it really becomes key. Now you have 5 and a goalkeeper versus 5 and a goalkeeper, 6 and a goalkeeper versus 6 and a goalkeeper. You begin without the pivot at 5v5, and then you with court players, and then you add the pivot, but you take away a backcourt. These are key skills and fundamental things for them to learn before high performance, no matter what the situation. Now you're developing gameplay competence in all phases of the game. And these include the micro phases. They extend and refine playing skills and individual techniques, develop tactics and strategies. This is where coaching comes in. The first real coaching aspect is here, where you're really talking about tactics and strategies and variations and how to defeat other coaches with tactics and strategies. You play a variety of the roles still on the court. I do not believe in early specialization in sports, and I don't believe it in positionally in the game of team handball. I still think everyone needs to be involved in being developed broadly, have game context from more positions in the developmental stages. These first four is key to high performance play. It's key. Understanding as a center back the struggles of the pivot when with different types and locations of passing is essential. If I don't go play that position, I've played it a lot, I can't really know. I can be told it, but I won't know it. And so this is where we play a variety of roles still. I don't want positional specialization yet. You don't know. Puberty if you're coaching kids that are 14 to 17, puberty is the great equalizer. You have kids who are advanced level play, early puberty, who are benefiting on the court because of the size and the early development of size and physicality. But the players that were late developers are still there because they had to work on technique and tactic. And when puberty lays the field bare, and now everything is even, what you'll find is the players of equal genetics, the player with the better tactical foundation will be the player that advances. And so it's key that they play a variety of roles, because if someone's short, like my own son, was very small, went to Partile Cup, was a right wing, he's a lefty, was the smallest kid on the court, and now he's 6'3" as an 18-year-old. And he's grown out of a traditional wing. And if I keep him at the wing position, I failed him by forcing him to be there, because I don't know where he'll end up. And so that's really the key to the advanced stage, is really all phases, all position competency. That's the foundation you need before high performance. And you do that with, here's the diagrams that you need to know, how you do the 5v5 on the court, and how you can break it up with no pivot and with pivot. Okay, and so I'm going to take a pause here. Everybody can kind of take a breath, consider. I'm going to pose and just 5 questions, leave them up here for just 2 minutes. And I want everyone to kind of consider what I've put up here, because now we move from building a better foundation or seeing the developmental stages to how we do it with high performance, how you can start now developing these skills. And then at the end, we'll ask questions. I'll have time for questions and answers. But we're now going to get into the meat. So I want you to really think about, what is high performance? What is the best way to develop my players? What skills should I be teaching? How do I assess their development? And what obstacles stand in my way? I'll give you another minute to kind of write down some notes. If you have any notes for questions, this is a good time to write them down. This is basically an 8 lecture presentation shrunk into 2. So I'm doing my best to provide the information you need and then move it to the next level. So we can discuss that this is just an introduction. So consider these questions as we go forward. I'm just gonna, okay. So hit the first question we asked. What is high performance gameplay? That answer to that question should dictate every action a coach does, every program a federation has, within a club, the connections between the stages. Everything is answered in that question. What is high performance gameplay? Science will tell you, and sport experience will tell you, that it's a collection of many things. It's a collection of tactical skills, motor skills, mental skills, technical skills, overlaid by performance, lifestyle skills, genetic disposition, predisposition. And then under it all is culture, recovery, and that's more of you, the club. The technical, mental, motor, and tactical are the direct domain of the coach. Performance, lifestyle, genetics, that's the player. Then the club or the system is underneath it all. And so I want to break it down into just an overview of what is high performance gameplay. It's fully developed technical skills in all situations, scale and scope. Scale meaning broad. I understand the skills that I need in every aspect. Scope meaning particular context. So you can see that technical skills are foundational and progressional, but see that the more developed and fuller the toolkit, the better the gameplay. The second aspect is complete tactical understanding in all phases and micro phases. This is essential for high performance play. And as coaches, we need to understand all of the tactical aspects of all the phases and micro phases. And by micro phases, I'm speaking generally about invasion game sports. We can talk about, fast break, first wave, second wave, third wave. We can talk about different aspects of that. But in micro phases, in tactical understanding for invasion games, there's 3 distinct phases. And there's 3 distinct phases of each. And to understand what's required in each is essential for your success on the court as a high performance coach. Highly developed motor skills, balance, speed, agility, endurance, coordination, strength, power. I'm going to talk to you later. I'd love to have a whole lecture on it about this and and what's required for that. But this isn't the lecture for that. But these are key components of skillful play, high performance play, highly developed mental skills. So this is where I think we sometimes forget we are such an important role in developing. Intelligence, problem solving, decision making, creativity. Those are 4 fundamental aspects of play that are not only have the potential to develop, but have the priority to develop. And how we establish ourselves as coaches, how we run our practices, how we set up for competition, how we perform during competition is all directly relatable to these skills. And it's my belief and my colleagues' belief that by creating a different model for development requires that they be taken into account at all times. Well, mostly all times. Finally, we have the athletic profile. I can't change the anthropomorphic profile of a player. I can improve its quality, but I can't change it. I can't change other intangibles. Leadership. You can help develop leadership skills, but leadership is an inherent quality. Grit. Grit is an inherent quality. Players have it or don't have it. Are they rugged enough to go the last 20% of development? And we all know how hard that is to predict. And we'll discuss that later. And I don't want to take up time now. But these are the components, the important components when you think of high performance gameplay. And to tag back to the French style. The French paradox was that here you had players playing this way, but not knowing why they were playing that way. How we build our practices greatly affect the type of players we develop, the quality of the players we develop. I'd like to think of development as a range. Each player comes to you with a range. You have the range at the low end where I could really screw him up, and you have the high end of what his potential is. I can't exceed his potential, but I can help him grow towards that potential and then leave it to him with those other intangibles to see if he can make it at the national team level. But I can't push someone past potential, and everyone's potential is prescripted. And so I can only do so much with what I have, with the time I have. So understanding how practice tasks are key is essential for understanding. As we've talked about, the very top part is this basic game form, and they're directly linked to game problem development in players. Reminder, what are our key major game problems? Maintaining possession, making forward progression, attacking the goal, and regaining ball possession. The basic game forms, which we'll examine in greater detail in a minute, create the need for players to develop. Instead of, that's the athlete-centered model. The opposite of that is the coach-centered model. I have a game plan in my mind of where they should be, and they must follow it. When they stray from it, I get upset, I get frustrated. What's wrong with my model? Well, my model's not flexible. And so basic game forms provide us. They advance from one game form to the next as fast as they develop the skills necessary to perform. That's the key. Partial game forms. Now we break down the partial game forms into highlighting technical and tactical aspects. Now this is really important. So the partial game forms take the basic game form and say, oh, my players are struggling with small group collaboration. So I have 2v2 with supporters, and so they can see that they're within the necessary use of space, width and depth come into play. I have a support person and I have an attacker, and so the partial game forms are essential. Small-sided games. Now this is something, so everyone has some version of 10 passes. You have two groups of 4 in a rectangle or square or whatever you want to set up, and you have 4v4, and you're trying to get 10 passes in a row. Pass and move, catch and move. These small-sided games are important because you're teaching skills without the structural gameplay elements. So you're basically isolating the skills outside of the basic game form context and creating a better atmosphere for players. And finally, in this first 4, the tactical games. The tactical games improve tactical skills and problem solving in particular game contexts under game-like conditions. These contexts and conditions could be 3v2, 2 backcourt players and a pivot against 2 defenders and a goalkeeper, and it's against the inside and half defenders on the right. These tactical games are important because it's only in the context of the game. It's something that they can then go back to and be like, how did I solve this? How did I, and how did I do something, pass to the pivot, and tactical games should always be introduced at half speed with passive defense, but should be increased and improved to be played under game-like conditions. How will the pivot be held by the defenders? How will the pass need to be more precise because the defenders aren't passive but active? And so you always want to make it under game-like conditions. These first 4 practice tasks are what's called the game-based approach. On my next slide, I'll discuss the benefits of this. But developing players in game context develops the high performance play that they need. The technical, tactical, the objects of the game, the solutions, the context of problems and solutions. And that's what the more players play in the game base, the better it is for them. Then you add tactical drills. So now you've gone from tactical games, which are the interrelationship of a lot of different movement patterns, to developing specific movement patterns, say crossing in a tactical drill. Developing tactical movement patterns and proficiency in them is key. I'm not saying we don't do that, but I'm saying it's key only in that you're introducing, but if you can't cross in game-like conditions with the defense there, then crossing means nothing. And if you're become comfortable doing it outside of the game context, it becomes difficult. Technical drills, then below the tactical movement patterns are basic movement skills. So you go one step lower, and now you're the technical drills. And this will be some aspect of crossing. Might be sidestep, might be passing. And so it's developing the key properties of the tactical movement patterns that you do in technical drills. And then there's rudiment drills. You know, everybody loves rudiment drills because you see all of the high-level coaches in their practice modules with all their little toys and bands and different apparatus that they use to develop the real foundation of the basic movement skills. Rudiment drills, you know, the transfer strong to weak step, you know, with bands. You know, you're working to really develop the physicality of specific basic movement skills, but using all sorts of repetitions to make it happen. And then finally, you have conditioning drills, which are developing the motor skills upon which all movements rely. Now you can see from development's perspective, the further you begin at the top and work your way down as you progress through the programs, as you go through, you know, from an overview from my standpoint is in just basic game form, small-sided games, and a little bit of technical drills in the warm-up. That's novice. You can add partial game forms in beginner, but really you introduce them in intermediate. Then you begin to add tactical games in intermediate. But then as you get into advanced and expert, you really move into adding the conditioning drills, the rudiment drills, the technical drills. Technical drills as a warm-up are very essential in the early phases, but only to introduce basic techniques. And so here's a look at the practice tasks. But the application for high performance, which we're going to get into, is you need to understand this. If you want to be a high performance coach, you need to understand all 8 of these categories. You know, we can go into high level stuff in a different lecture about cycle preparations, you know, for tournaments, cycle preparation for league play. And so we can, you know, talk about those type of things. But for now, you need to understand these 8 because they directly relate to applying our program. So let's talk a minute about small-sided games and game-like tasks versus technique-oriented approach in drills. What we're saying here, as in our book and in our programming, is that small-sided games and tasks are better at developing players at earlier stages than technique-oriented approaches. It's a high activity level. You have more people involved. You have more people on the ball. You have more people working in collaboration with the ball when you're playing games. You know, I remember reading a statistic, you know, like for a single player, you know, 7% of a game might be in possession of the ball. So much of what we learn in handball is activity and being coordinating in relationship to the person with the ball or the person defending the person with the ball. You know, in game-based models, changing conditions versus stable conditions. This is key. This is key. Handball is a dynamic, fast-paced sport. Conditions change quickly, and they change quickly in a series of successions sometimes, where you can have 2-3 turnovers in a row with intercepted passes, and you've been on fast break and retreat 3 times in 20 seconds. And preparing players, high performance players, for the aspect of changing conditions is essential. And the games-based approach does that. Decision-making process is increased when you play games. Techniques, there's no decision-making and technique, and to not have decision-making and technique tied together is to not properly teach technique. And then it's adaptive. It's diverse. Not every player will do the same thing because I'm not telling them this is what you have to do. Each player will get a feel, will read the situation and make decisions. Those decisions will be more instinctual and correct. For the French, that's where they get to. They get to where it's so quick, it looks like it's planned. but they sit in a meeting or they get interviewed and say they feel insecure because they're not in possession of all of the big picture stuff. Group performance over individual performance. And this is key for developing teams. You have to be developing as many people as you can simultaneously, concurrently. It has to happen. And so if you have everybody standing in line waiting to do a technique so the coach can approve or disapprove, correct or not correct, you have a lot of activity and time and development lost for players. So group performance games include the most. You can divide a court into 4 games. I could have 20 kids divided into 3 or 4 games of 6 passes, and everyone is involved simultaneously. I can make corrections in a general broad sense, but I don't need to blow a whistle and stop it. If something glaring happens, I may need to, but I prefer to let it play out. I prefer to let them get a feel for it to then come to me with questions. I was struggling with this. How can I do that? And so for me, group performance is much more important than individual performance. In the end, it's a team sport. And this is one of the key aspects. I'm not going to get into the trial consistency and variability. One of the key aspects is this idea of the complete teaching of the game instead of a sub-element of the game. That's where always relating back to the major game problems, always relating back to major game problems, always in the context of the game, conflict resolution. This is where it's key for developing high performance players, because in the end, we're trying to create space, solutions. We're trying to develop skills. But if they do it multitasking versus single tasking, and it's not as easy to, it's easy to say in a multitasking sense, oh, that's chaotic. But in a single task case, you can equally say you're losing, because nothing we do in a sport is single tasking. You never just you never just are told, go perform a split step. There's no context. So multitasking, split step to jump shot. You can train that, but in a game context, you can make it fun and engaging and always complicate things and provoke the need to answer questions. But that's why we believe at Handball at School, the game-based approach is the best way to develop players. It's fun, it's engaging, it provokes, it allows them to ask questions instead of answer questions. And so it changes the priority to an athlete-centered model. And developmentally wise, that's key. As we move forward, then it comes down to structure. This is, I'm an hour and how far into it. So I'm an hour and 20 minutes into a subject matter, and now we're talking about the real stuff. I talked to you about the basis for our developmental model, which you need to go to the book to see, but now we're talking about the real things. What is open play versus set play? And this is where the French system versus others comes into play. Do you want a more enjoyable, rewarding, fun, and variable action as a result of an environment where the players read the situation, answer the questions presented with them, and solve them without having to call a timeout to give them the answers? In open play, it's based on game principles, 4 major game problems. I'm always going to repeat this. Maintaining ball possession, making forward progression, attacking the goal, regaining ball possession. But this triggers gameplay and initiative and creativity and intelligence. And that's what we want in high performance. That goes back to the mental skills. By tying tactics and technique to game problems, you trigger gameplay initiative, creativity, and intelligence, which creates the need for self-regulated choices and actions. I learned this when I coached the USA Deaf national team, and I understood that I couldn't, as I was very basic in my sign language, my ASL. I was very basic in my American Sign Language, and so I could only relate larger topics, but more specifics were either before the game or at halftime, and rarely during the game. And I learned that creating self-regulated choices and actions in my players was essential for our success. And in the end, that's more enjoyable. It's more rewarding. It's fun, and the outcomes are better. If I don't need to coach in the game and I've given them all the tools they need to solve the problems themselves, they don't rely on me. They rely on themselves and each other, and that's open play. The other is a pre-scripted, pre-trained collective of maneuvers that create the gap they want to attack. It's mechanized. It inhibits decision-making skills. It's developed by the coach, controlled by the coach, and it's more monotonous and predictable. The fast-changing dynamic play, especially since 2016 and the new rules, makes it harder to coach and better to play. And open play for a developmental program is key for creating players who can answer the questions they're presented with. Which brings us to this idea of how do I implement the game-based approach? And learning how to do so will take more than this slide can present. But I want to offer it up. I want to offer it up as an idea for you to really learn what it means to do this type of approach. How do I coach my team using a game-based approach? But the thing I ask of you to consider is how do you do it now? Most of us walk onto the court, we have a plan in place we want to work on. Why are you working on that? Some of us will say, oh, they struggled with this at the last game. But directly answering the questions you couldn't solve in the game doesn't mean you shouldn't have looked back and set up and answered earlier questions. So the first step in implementing the game-based approach is being honest. Identify your player's level. The first stage is identifying your player's learning. What does this mean? Learning to read the game problems and answer questions that you ask yourself about them. Are they able to maintain ball possession against a inferiority defense? Are they able to maintain ball possession against a full court pressure defense? If the answer is yes, then you don't need to ask that question. And then you can assign. The second stage is to say, this is where my players are. And the second stage is to say, what basic game form? Maybe I only have to go back to intermediate. But by answering my questions about my players, which I talk about in the book, will help me then assess what game form, the basic game forms, 3v2 plus goalkeeper, 3v3 full court press, 3v3 half court press, 4v4 with the two-line defense, 5v5, 6v6. Then we get to the standard game form. And so learners play the game form. And we go back to the teaching game from understanding. You remember the cycle. You introduce the game form. You let them play it. You let them think tactically. What do I need to do? And then you start to develop the skills and the learning tasks to help them. And once they've satisfied that, you move to the next game form. It doesn't have to be as structured as, say, for the next 2 years. If they've answered the questions in 4 months, then move to the next, because they'll get bored. They will get bored. And then you diagnose the game problems, the needs, and set a plan. The third stage is so important, diagnosing the game problems. You have to understand, what are the 4 game problems? How do they change through the developmental cycle? Because you're not always just asking maintaining ball possession. You're asking, how do I do it against particular? And then you can get to the advanced level where you're going to ask yourself, how do I attack the goal and score against a 3-2-1 defense? So many of these lectures that my colleagues are doing are lectures about game problems at the advanced and expert level. But if you're not ready to answer the questions of those problems, you need to understand which ones preceded them. And then finally, it's designing tasks to teach the skills. And I'm going to go over this in depth next. The fourth step is designing tasks, coach the skills. Remember, teach and coach, teaching and coaching, they're interchangeable. You next go back, and then you come back through the cycle again and ask deeper questions. And this is how development works. This game-based approach is a cycle, and it's always based on the actual quality of play of your players presently. That's the difference. You're always assessing where they are at, prescribing what to do, and then designing the tasks and actually teaching the skills and coaching the skills. That's the key. So I'm going to break down the development of, and this is in our book. Our book is an immense depository of information about this, but I'm going to look at it from attacking the goal and scoring. So we're going to look at one major game problem. I'm going to talk about the overviews through the developmental stages. And then I'm going to break down the actual stages of learning. And the overall importance that you need to take with you is that there's stages. And if my players can't perform what I say right now, then you need to go back to the one before it and master that one. And that's that first step, assessing. What is the where are my players at in the developmental arc? I'm in playing at a certain level, meaning I'm playing international competition. I'm playing third division in my country. That's different than what level are they actually playing? What do they know? What can they do? And so here, attacking the goal and scoring. We're looking a little bit deeper at that. Creating an opening, taking an opening shot, taking an open shot, shooting skills, solving advantage in wide open space, things we've been going over. But then it begins to move to faking and cutting, creating advantages in small spaces, and then creating advantages in really small spaces. It keeps getting smaller. Space constricts. You're proficient, proficient, proficient. If you're not proficient at something, you need to go back and help them become proficient at the stage before. But this is where understanding the developmental process and understanding the skills they need matters. That's why coaching certification matters. That's why putting in your own time to develop yourself matters. All of you are doing that by taking this seminar, but it really matters when we're trying to develop high performance players. And you can see, let's look at the final one, solving advantage, creating advantage, shooting from narrow angles, flanks. You know, wing play is just flanking the defense. And so you're starting to develop through this with attacking the goal and scoring. So there's our game, one of our major game problems. The 4 most important questions to ask yourself at every stage in the developmental process is this, as a coach. What do they need to know? What do they need to do with the ball? Or on defense, what do they need to do with if they're the primary defender of the ball? What do they need to do without the ball or as a supporting defender? And how do I help them get better? In our book, we really break this down. And I'm not going to go over all the things I'm about to show you, but we break down the stages. Again, looking at first and second stages of attacking the goal. But let's just talk about the broad questions and answers. What are the tactical skills and concepts they need to know? We just talked about that. What are the actual skills they need with the ball? Linking the catch with one running step and forming the throwing position. There's a novice level skill. Off the ball actions, knows where to be positioned to give support and execute the run-up approach to receive and to attack goal. And then we give you the type of tasks you need. Designing learning tasks, lead-up games, throwing with diverse coordinative and motor tasks. You know, and I'm not going to go over the particulars because that's not essential. What you need to know in this overview is that we have the tools you need to develop your players. And we have the question and answers you need to see, do I know what I need to provide them? Do I have the ability to provide it to them? And that's the key of learning to develop as a coach, is that you have to ask questions about yourself and not be ashamed to ask others. I don't know the answer to this. For me, developing as a coach in a system that there was no structure was difficult. There were so many times I had situations, Pan American Championships, 2017, Chile. I'm in a game against Costa Rica. We just got eliminated from the World Championships before the game, started out flat, found ourselves 6 goals behind. We have a tie game. and we have like 10 seconds to go. My best player's marked, and I held on to it. I didn't know what to do in that situation. It was my first experience of that particular situation. I had 3/4 of the court to go, and we didn't succeed. But as coaches, we need to say, raise our hand and ask colleagues and ask our bosses and say, what would you have done in that situation? So the next time. So learning to ask questions about yourself, about the game, and learning how to answer them is a key step for you as a coach. It was key for me to learning that situation. I never not prepared for that situation. Haven't seen it again, but that's where I was at the time in my development as a coach. And so that's key for you to understand. Okay, and so then once you ask these 4 questions, and you can see in our book, we have the answers and an overview for you, you can see that the concepts and skills required for each stage of development are provoked by the introduction of each new basic game form. When we move from beginner level to intermediate level, it provokes a lot of need to understand the game and to provide concepts and skills for our players. And I'm not going to break this down, but this is from our book, and you can see that the same 4 categories. What do they need to know? What do they need to do on the ball? What do they need to do off the ball? What sort of practice and learning tasks can I provide them that give them better skills and understanding and develop them holistically? And that's the key in this 3rd stage, the intermediate stage. And I said this before, and we go back to it again. And if you notice in our book, it's like this, it's really the first real coaching stage. It really takes a lot of work to coach and understand at this intermediate developmental stage, because you cannot do the advanced stage without the skills you learn in this one. You can skip over a lot of them because in the 1st and 2nd, or gloss over them quickly because of their basic movement skills that are from other sports. But in this, it becomes very particular to handball. Dribble, draw, approach, penetration, shooting, drawing defender to make space. Think about that. You're drawing a defender to make space. And so you're creating the things you need your players to do, and the practice tasks, the learning tasks are all directly involved, whether they have the ball or not, which comes to our 4th stage. And I'm not going to go into it here because our program touches at it, but it's really what we've talked about, this idea that you then take and you all develop fully all the game faces, all the positions. You really discuss the different types of defense. And all of these new defenses provoke, the sheet is so long, in which you'll see in a second, at the advanced level of play. But this is where the handball at school and high performance play are interrelated, because even though the program is meant for teachers who don't know the sport, the program is designed under ideal conditions. What if we had the perfect coach or teacher? The perfect coach or teacher who had the time and the resources to fully develop players, had the continuity and the capacity to do so, kept learning, certifying. And we created a program in which, under ideal circumstances, this is where we could be and go. And that's what's important to understand, because building a better foundation for high performance requires 2 things from you: knowledge of the concepts and skills required of skillful play, and the tools to develop these concepts and skills in individuals, small groups, and teams. And sometimes it's important because there's some people on this call that are developing it across a large group of teams. So they'll have young kids, adolescents, young adults. And so sometimes it's simultaneously trying to look and see at multiple levels, how is this working? But it always comes back to, where is a person at and how can I help them get better? And which comes down to this. Here's what our book comes to. Here is the novice, beginner, intermediate, and advanced curriculum. I'm not going to go into it. I want you to see it for its breadth of what it is. There's a link to our book right here, which we will send out in a message form in a minute. But this is the complete developmental curriculum. This is a complete high performance foundation that you will need. Within each section is the game problem, the decisions and movements that are required of the players, and the skills. tactical, technical, related to game problem, all the questions you'll have to ask of your players if you really want to develop them to be high performance players. If you really want to have them developed in such a way that Jorge Dueñas can come do defensive tactics with them and not have to explain anything, because that's always the key. And then we come back to, well, how do we know? How do we test and assess? I'm not going to go into it in depth. We have several subchapters in our book on testing and assessment, but it'll look something like this. You're asking the questions, and I'll just go from the dark gray box. Is unable, poor gameplay competence, is unable to create advantage. Is unable to, fair would be is unable to create advantage most of the times. Is able to create advantage. That's good. Is able to consistently create advantage. That's great. And you can start to rate your players and see what they're at, and how we ask these questions and rate them and assess them will change how we develop them. And that's what our book provides. And I think that's why linking handball at school, not just as a program you bring into your country, but as a program you inject into your club, into your federation as a concept. You know, this is what we're looking for. This is the checklist of what players, what qualities we need. And then it comes back to the obstacles. The last question I ask you to consider as I wrap up today is obstacles to development. The most obvious ones: time, money, federation support. I'm not in Brazil. I don't have Brazil's budget. I'm in the United States. It's hard. We don't have the time. We don't have the money. We don't have the federation support to fully develop coaches, to fully develop players through that. And what does that mean? That's a major obstacle, and it's one we have to overcome. The second major obstacle is we lack an understanding of the target zones for motor and playing skills development for boys and girls. There isn't just one way, and they're all tied to the sweet spots for motor and playing skills development. And I cut the slides. I had 3 slides on this earlier, but I don't like the time frame that it takes. But a lack of understanding of the target zones for motor and skills and playing skills is a big obstacle to development. Boys and girls are attached to their peak height velocities. What matters is that their sweet spots precede their largest growth, which means you can do more with less time with a player that's just about to hit their sweet spot, their peak height trajectory, than you can with players who have already gone through it. And so that's an important thing to remember in the developing world. We need to find younger players. If you want to fully develop players, you have to work towards younger players, and especially as it relates to boys and girls and their sweet spots. Another obstacle is an incomplete knowledge of the handball developmental process. That is key. I remember when I wrote my first book at the University of Minnesota, and I was starting to read all the different arguments there were about handball development and all the different schools, and had to come back to an understanding of basic motor functioning development, basic sport, broad sport development, and how that related to the initial stages in all sports. And then to see, like, for what I said before, in the intermediate phase, you become more adept at handball specific problems. Another obstacle to development. Most of us confuse talent selection with long-term development. I can walk in a gym and tell you who the best athlete at a sport is by watching them play. It is almost impossible to walk into a gym and not know the players, watch them play, and know who will be the best player 1 year from now, who will be the best player 3 years from now, or who will be the best player 5 years from now. The 5-year question is essential to understanding how much you know about development. But that question can't be answered without kinesiological, psychological, sociological understandings of development and how puberty relates to that. To go back to the example of my son, who's now 6'3", was the shortest kid on the team, was tiny. He was not even 4'11" when he was in freshman year of high school, and now he's a senior 4 years later and he's 6'3". How do we go about understanding the relationship between puberty and development, and how we can do better at long-term development than talent selection. Another obstacle that we have, immediate focus on winning to maintain our coaching position. This is always going to be a stressor, especially in the developing world. If I am a small upstart country and I'm now the junior national team coach, and my federation put together a group of players, say 5 weeks before a tournament, none of them had seen it before, and winning or success on the court matters for if I continue to coach, that's an impossible situation. I'm not focused on development. I'm focused on building some skills immediately, and I have to skip steps. But long-term development and obstacle to development are shortcuts. There really are no shortcuts. There's going to be players who defy the odds. We have a player like that plays for the U.S. national team and was a coach for me. He defies the odds. He found the game at mid-20s and really excelled at it and learned a level of creativity and competence that's unusual in a short time. But he's the outlier. And so immediately need to win is an obstacle to development. And then finally, confidence as a coach. Confidence to develop yourself as a coach, your worth as a coach, and giving yourself credit for the difficult job that you have. Coaching is a hard job. Coaching high performance is an even harder job. We travel a lot. We're away from our families. We're with these particular kids for a long time. And you get frustrated, because when you're with a team, you're not just with the team on the court. When we traveled to the World Championships, we had our training camp in Portugal, and then we had 3 weeks at the World Championships. It's a long time to be in close proximity. And so I need to learn not just to develop myself as a coach, let's say on the court, I also need to learn professional development skills. But I have to have the confidence to say, I'm important enough to develop. And I think that's why having handball at school as a background, having your level D license, having your level C license, moving up through it is an important strategy, not just for the development and success of your program, but for the development of yourself as a coach and a person. And I think I'll leave it there. All of this could go into, each slide could be a lecture of its own, but I wanted to give you an overview and hopefully have a way for you to see that maintaining a strong foundation is key to success, and the answers are out there for you. So I really appreciate everyone's time, and I'll open up this now for question and answers. I'll let you enjoy the picture of Julio and I at the first ever American win at a World Championships. It's the first time. It's the picture of development. All our work with some of those players I'd had since they were 12 years old. And there we were at the Junior World Championships earning our first win. And so I'll leave it now to open up for questions. And I appreciate your time.
Okay, great. Thank you. We have some questions here. I'm gonna pass it to you. We have one question from Mario Hernandez from Jalisco. He's asking, it's from your point of view, it's good to use for different goalkeepers when in the lower basic or in school games, because as I understand, it's compulsory to use 4. So from your point of view, is this a good way to develop those games?
Are you talking about to develop good goalkeepers?
No. So the question is that there are 4 keepers, that it's compulsory to put them in the game. So do you think that rule it's well applied according with the purposes of the handball school?
I would say so. So handball at school has a general idea on goalkeeping. Our general theory is this: all players should be exposed to the goalkeeping position unless they have a predetermined strong fear. We don't force a kid who's absolutely frightened to experience something that is traumatizing to them. But we wish to have as many kids experience gameplay at goalkeeper from an early age. I believe I believe in two things. And for my own team handball academy, I believe this as well, which is goalkeepers should be developed as court players as late as possible, but also still specializing, but still getting experience with it. And I believe more people should be developed as goalkeepers at the youth ages. So the foundational ages, because you do not know, because of puberty, who will end up being an ideal body type, who will be an ideal. You don't know until puberty how someone will really be as a goalkeeper. And the more goalkeepers you have, the better. And so the more experiences they have, the better, versus specialize. So if you have to rotate between four, it's not good to have one play 80% and then share the 20% between the other three. Sometimes we have to look at development at the cost of winning as an important developmental question to ask ourselves. And so I see playing as many as you can, as much as you can, to be developmentally important.
Okay, we have another question from Nestor Jesus Castro. He said, well, good day to all. When is the best stage to start teaching the tactic?
The first stage of tactics is that intermediate stage. So the first, and it's a rudimentary tactic, which means it's a basic tactic, because with the tactics of, if he's saying tactics like positional play, which means the rudimentary tactic would be inward and outward attack. Draw the defenders inward, pass outward. Draw the defenders outward, pass inward. That's a tactic. It's a very basic tactic. It's essential for understanding the bigger tactics like crossings and stuff like that. You know, but I think at that second to third stage, the beginning of understanding positions outside and inside is key to the teaching of tactics. But you shouldn't teach, if you have new players who are 18 years old, and you should not teach them the 5-1 defense in their first practice. You shouldn't teach them the different, you need to teach them why the tactics matter. I cross against a flat defense. I don't cross against an offensive defense. I do, you know, against in advantage play, I want breakthroughs. There's no reason to teach jump shots until then. Until breakthroughs are no longer available, you shouldn't really spend a lot of time focusing on jump shots. You should introduce it before the time you expect it, so then they can start to apply it. But tactics themselves, that intermediate stage of play, that third stage, is important to the beginning of tactics. And then the advanced is really much more into particular tactics that we understand for high performance play. But for high performance play, you need to have the rudimentary tactics in place to understand it, its usefulness. I hope I answered the question.
Thank you, Craig. And the other comments that we have is excellent presentation. Thank you. Alejandro Trejo is saying that, and also Carlos Luis Diaz Campos, that he wants that he wants to thank you directly for the presentation of today. There's another one here. Dio Lorenzo Hendrickson said, good day. What are your thoughts on using a smaller goal as a training aid for offensive players?
I firmly believe the training with alternative balls, with alternative goal sizes, alternative types of goal areas, shapes, rounded, rectangular, or no goal area at all that's fixed but has a destination that they must attack. I think those are all key in the developmental process. I think training on a small goal, this is something I like to do with my middle school age players in the third stage of the process, because a smaller goal trains the goalkeepers to rely on their footwork and coordination, and it trains the shooters to look for vulnerabilities in the lower, especially at newer goalkeepers, much more active and proficient with their hands, less proficient with their legs, and that continues through the span of goalkeeper development. So I think the training for small goals is actually an essential tool, and the rule is called Change It, CHANGEIT, and it basically talks about anything that has a benefit for creating better proficiency at an aspect of the play should be altered, could be altered. You could say one dribble, you could say no dribble. To change something is to focus on something. And I think changing to a smaller goal actually teaches the goalkeepers to rely on their feet instead of their hands, and it teaches the shooter to shoot at vulnerabilities. So I find that to be essential. So I think that's a good move.
Okay, we have another one from Samuel Payne from Barbados. He's explaining the situation of his country. They are very new in handball, that they are focusing more in talent selection, no long-term development because of the population of the country. His specific question is, what is the best way to develop a player who have came for another sporting background? Do I treat the person as a novice and start with basic skill?
Everyone should be treated as a novice. And I've played against countries that tried to play. I've played in tournaments like IHF Trophy with my girls in Montreal, where we played against teams that were underdeveloped, as teams that were trying to play advanced tactics with players who you should always go back to the level they are. You should always go back to the level they are and begin there. You can then translate that. So if you have a group of youth national team players from Barbados who aren't going to play competitions in 3v2 plus goalkeeper, you should go back and train within 3v2 plus goalkeeper, but then translate that to the larger game, which means your development time should always reflect both. The game you have to play because of your age, and the game you should be playing to learn the techniques you need of small group collaborations, passing and catching, basic movements, footwork patterns. It should always go back to the level your players are, not the level you wish your players were, from my perspective and from our perspective.
I think, Griselda Burone, that with this answer, Craig already answered your question, because she was asking about handball players that start from zero at university level. So how to start working with them? So I think
you should start working. I would work with university age players, not in a 3v2 plus goalkeeper, but in a 4v3 plus goalkeeper mode. If they're older, you have a couple more older players because they have sport experience, because they've watched sports, because they have a much more diverse game context to base their actions on. We'll skip over what's called the anarchic play, which is to coalesce around the ball that young kids have. And so by going 4v3 plus goalkeeper, you open it up. But you should always begin with these levels, because you can't introduce basic introductory moves and skills in the context of the full game. You can't play 6v6 with positions and specialize before that step. Doesn't mean you can't have what I call a modified track. At my Team Handball Academy, we think hard about how do we take a player in later than his colleague or his teammates and bring him up to speed, or how do we begin with a new group? When I went to the IHF Trophy, my girls were so young. Frantisek can agree to this. They almost didn't let us play in the tournament. What no one understood was they were technically proficient. They were skillful players. They were way undersized. When we played Martinique, I think we were half height as all the players on Martinique, but we still performed. We ended up beating Puerto Rico. We beat another team St. Kitts. And so for us, it was, we actually won 2 games against Puerto Rico, the last one by 20. And so, but my young girls who had technical skills and game problem competency did quite well for their age. We weren't going to win the tournament, but I'm developing them over the long period. Some of my girls will get 3 complete cycles in the youth category, which means in 2023, those girls will have be playing in their 3rd IHF trophy youth category, which is a huge development thing for them. And that's what we have to start to think, that it's not about the age, it's about the skills. And if they have the skills, even basic skills in a basic game form, being successful at it will translate better to 6v6 than to try to skip all the processes and teach them advanced skills. They can't do it. You have to identify where they're at now, today, and develop them to go forward from there. And they're not all going to be the same. Sometimes I might have 10 players who are at one level and 10 players who are below them. That's a difficult decision as a coach. Which one do I go towards? And a lot of times selection versus talent development comes into play here. I see the levels really high with this one group and they're really good and this group is really low, and I don't develop it properly. But the modified track allows me to kind of bring up to speed and select. But in the end, you want everybody to be within a range of each other. And in the end, they're not all going to be in the range. Some players, by grit, leadership, personal characteristics, will advance quickly. If I could have done video, my frame rate wasn't very good. I examined a player of mine named Tegan and showed his development as a player in each of these stages. I understood my frame rate wasn't going to be good, so I cut the videos. I'll maybe link these up into an email to my Team Handball Academy YouTube page for people to see, but I show you what happens when a player advances beyond his counterparts. But then I also show you how he got pushed up as a 14, 15-year-old to be the starting center back on the junior national team, and he hated it. He wasn't emotionally ready to be with almost men. He didn't have his friends. He didn't have all the things around him. And that's what's important. We have to ask the questions, you know, and I had to ask the tough question. We pushed him too fast and I lost him. And so those are the important questions that people are asking. So I'll let you go to the next.
Okay. We have the last one from Héctor Eduardo Perez from Baja California, Mexico. It's pretty much the same differentiation between girls and boys when they're starting in handball, but he's asking about which is the recommended time to work with basic fundamental with them, because some of them advance quicker than others.
And that's the key. The key is to understand the sweet spots. Maybe I can share my screen and bring it up. Hold on. Let me bring, hold on. I'm going to bring up, hold on. Is my screen still sharing with everyone? Hold on.
Yep.
Okay, so this is the book. Hold on. There it is. So if everybody's watching, here's the sweet spots for development for girls and boys. If you notice, there's a window here. There's a window. It doesn't mean that over the course of, for every player from 13 to 17, for girls, the second level of speed can be developed. It just means that's the window when most of the girls will be. It's a tighter window individually, but as a group, you can see. You really want to align how you develop your practices and your tasks based on these charts. Because what in the book, it's in there. It shows what each of the sweet spots are, and you can draw a vertical line at a certain age and see, for boys, I can hit 5 or 6 sweet spots in one age group. But if you look at 16, 17, and 18, the sweet spots are gone. Our work is harder, slower, and in the end, less close to potential for an athlete the later we get them. That's why so much of this push for, like in my own country, for finding college age students, I struggle with, because I know the science. The science says I have to do twice as much work for less results with a 20-year-old who's learning the sport than I can get with an 11-year-old in the sport. I can do more in far less time. I can plant a seed, water the plant, let the plant go away, and it may come back and bloom for me. But it's hard to get the full bloom if I plant the seed of handball in someone that's 18, 19, and 20. If I have a 13, 14, and 15-year-old boy, I can do a lot in 1 year. But what I'm interesting, and to talk about the difference between boys and girls, I've now switched over to the women's side, and now I'm the cadet and youth national team coach for USA Team Handball. And I find I can do more per practice with girls than I ever could with boys. I think when I break down my development plan based on my own trajectories, my young girls of the same age group can do in about 3/4 of a practice what it would take a practice and a half for me to develop within boys and to work on. There's far better, and so there's inherent aspects to that and differences between girls and boys. There's sociological, they're psychological, they're physiological. And so for me, it's been interesting because I have to adapt my game plans for how to introduce skills and concepts, because my girls have been just moving. They progressed so much faster than I did with the boys. I was able to take a group of 16 girls who I basically had 2 months to prepare, and we won 3 games at IHF Trophy. And we were 4 years younger than our counterparts on average. Our average age was 14, theirs was 17. And we were younger than them, but we were still able to compete against them. And in some cases, win handily. And a lot of it has to do with what I discovered in the difference between boys and girls, is that I can really train a pre-competition cycle better with girls than I ever did with boys. And so that's a key thing for me to learn. And that's part of the reason I switched from the men's side to the women's side, so I'd have a fuller repertoire as a coach to develop myself and my players. So I really appreciate everyone's time. I hope I didn't bore too much. It's an important topic for us to all to discuss, and I've left myself, I'll put my thing back up. If anybody wishes to, hold on. If anybody wishes to talk more, I've left my emails for both my national team email and my academy email here. If anyone has particular questions they later have, I'd be willing to discuss. If you're wanting to bring handball at school to your country, we're right now working on some different aspects of the coronavirus, of building a coaching curriculum into an online tool that you can then develop practical and theoretical sessions online instead of in person. So we can discuss with you more on that. But I really appreciate everyone's time, and I hope you learned something and can use this in your own programs. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. Just one more thing, and before to say goodbye today, many people through the text messages was asking me about the material. So it would be great to have it as soon as we finish, and then we will send it to all participants because they're eager.
I'll send the link for the book, and then for the website, where the Spanish for the coaches who are predominant Spanish, we should have in maybe a week or two, I'm hoping, to have the finalized version for everyone of Spanish. So, but thank you. We'll provide all the resources.